So welcome to the channel. So today I want to share what I feel strongly about, which is non-traditional medicine. So I am a traditionally trained physician, an MD that was in the ER and had a greater than 20-year career in the ER. And then I branched out of traditional medicine based on a passion I had for non-traditional medicine, which means approaches to common problems that we might have, but solutions that don't involve medications or surgeries. And so as I learned more and more about it in over a 10-year time frame, I was educating on it, loved everything I was learning, and finally decided to put it into practice. And so I did that after a very solid traditional career path. And I was an emergency physician and loved it until I didn't love it. But when I decided to veer off, it was because I had an opinion and I was passionate about non-traditional approaches. But I realized that there was a gap between what I was practicing and what I was passionate about. So I had a small office and I launched a larger location in 2019, wanting to build out a practice where I could actually provide those solutions to patients and they would have this great place to go to find comprehensive solutions. Well, then COVID hits. And so as I'm in the new location and the business is just starting, it's my first business venture. And I'm, at an age where most aren't, veering off a stable career and into another business venture or a business venture. I was doing it and I'm watching everything around us close down. And so for the first time, I'm seeing something, as we all did, that we had never seen happen before. So I had to step back and think, what happens to this practice? So I've decided to branch off. I'm very passionate about what I'm doing, but what happens? This is something I've never seen before. And then I realized that the more and more I heard how we were approaching COVID, how we're shutting everything down, the fear tactics that were driving everything, how we're forcing people to do something with their bodies, very highly unusual time, right? We had never experienced it before, 6 feet apart. My immunity in the ER was built based on the fact that I was exposed to viruses and bacteria all the time. And I felt like I never got sick because of my exposure. And now all of a sudden, they're telling me that my natural immunity isn't good and isn't going to protect me, yet we've been exposed to viruses forever. So it wasn't making sense to me. And then I heard more and more input from everyday people. Again, I'm very into real world experiences. And so I realized that this business is going to do very well because I'm passionate about non-traditional approaches, and patients are very proactive in wellness in health now. So they were also very skeptical about traditional approaches. And so they were looking for something that didn't involve medications and surgeries. And they were very distrusting suddenly of medicine because medicine was forcing something on them that they didn't necessarily agree with. And they were also distrusting of the 3-letter agencies that were forcing things on them as well. And so I realized it's going to do well. And in fact, that gap in medicine was bigger than I thought. So why are we distrusting of medical providers? Not medical providers, because it's not a provider and they're doing what they learned. And I was doing the same thing in traditional medicine. So you really have to branch off and learn a different path and then put it into practice. But why are we distrusting? Because it's more of a monologue. So when you go to your physician, it's a monologue. It's not a dialogue. So we're basically telling people that they need to be on medicines, that they need to approach. We diagnose them with a disease, number one. We aren't preventing. We're treating a disease. We put them on medications with no plan to take them off. We've never learned that in traditional medicine. We were going to put somebody on a high blood pressure medicine and eventually get them off. That is not how we approach things. And there's a monologue, right? There's steps that we do. There's regimented treatment pathways. And so it's not like you can bring them some new idea and they're open to it, because also insurance dictates how long they can spend in traditional medicine with a person, what kind of testing they can do, what kind of treatments are covered. But they also have patients believing that that insurance dictation of care is acceptable as well. And so that there is also a full-time job of getting anything covered when it is an insurance-based treatment. And meds and surgeries aren't necessarily what people are looking for. And so we just have a lack of education in traditional medicine of nutrition, fitness, regenerative treatments that might be out there, and supplements. And those regenerative treatments also are not studied very well. So again, there was just a distrust going on, and it happens to be a distrust for traditional. And I had branched off because I really didn't agree with the traditional approaches, but that's how I was trained. But I really just wanted to try something that wasn't meds and surgeries and look into different solutions. And I was and am still very passionate about that. And also, we have no education on sex in the traditional system. And so I also have a focus of sexual wellness, which is still not covered in traditional education. So anyhow, if we look at meds and surgeries, and when people are of the mindset that something has to be studied before it can be implemented, there's randomized controlled studies. If we look at those studies have certain populations. It's not a full spectrum population. Sometimes it's not even the population necessarily being treated. Women are excluded from a lot of studies. So we're using studies that apply to men, knowing that physiology is quite a bit different. With the things such as medications, those studies show side effects. Sometimes there's significant mortality as part of that study or medication, and it's accepted. And if you look at a drug insert, it has tons of side effects, almost listing any potential side effect because somebody has had it. So we have side effects with those trials and those studies, and we have mortality with those trials and studies. And so when we look at regenerative medicine and we bash studies or regenerative medicine because there aren't studies that back it, number one, it's hard to do a regenerative treatment necessarily, like a laser vaginal rejuvenation, because somebody would know whether they had heating during their process or not. Women aren't studied. Surveys are studied more than actual treatment approaches for sexual wellness, but you can't really randomize that. Plus, we're about 10 years out by the time we get to a result. And the question is always, is it sustained or is it safe? Well, most of the regenerative treatments have shown to be safe. There aren't significant side effects with them because we're just giving the body back what it needs. So if we're doing like a laser vaginal rejuvenation or an acoustic shock wave with men for erectile dysfunction, we are communicating with the body in some way, whether it's a sound wave or a laser wavelength with heat to communicate that there's an injury and to repair. And so we're communicating with the body to have the body repair itself. And so we're giving the body back what it needs to repair and communicating with it that way. So there aren't side effects with it. There could potentially have been, but now a lot of the regenerative treatments have been looked at and the safety concerns aren't there. And so whether it's effective long-term is the question. Or there aren't studies to promote it, but we have studies for the medications, and those studies are backed by big pharma, and the medications have side effects and they have mortality affiliated with them. And those are on every drug insert. And so if we bash a regenerative treatment that isn't a drug and it isn't a surgery and it's giving the body back what it needs to regenerate, but we don't have studies and we bash because we don't have studies, basically knowing big pharma supports all studies, that means that we are bashing the fact that there aren't big pharma funded studies, right? And so that's the conflict of interest. Basically, I would say that we need to look at surveys. We need to look at, whether people are getting results. And when you look online, you will see that the results are there. There isn't safety concerns with some treatments. And I think just having an informed consent or approach to it is the most important thing you could do. Having a dialogue with the physician, trusting the physician, looking at reviews, all of those things you really don't get an opportunity to do in traditional medicine, but you should look at any physician as it's an interview both ways, right? So you need to make sure that office or that physician is right for you as well. Get a second opinion, have a dialogue, ask questions. If there's something that you want to know more of, but maybe not something they offer, ask. It's within your right to get information and to make informed decisions. And so basically, there's also supplements, there's nutrition, there's fitness, there's all kinds of things. It's not just hormones, it's not just laser treatments, But regenerative medicine is just an approach that doesn't involve surgery and medications, and it involves getting a solution to some common problems. So I am curious to kind of see where you guys fit on this, because I even look at something simple such as vitamin C IV therapy, and we do IV therapy at RevitalyzeMD. And I put our IV therapy together with my pharmacy background. And it's amazing what you can just do with nutrient IV therapy. And vitamin C at a high dose can work as an adjunct to chemotherapy. And there's studies that support it, but there's not large scale studies because there's not big pharma that will support a vitamin C therapy study. And yet it's vitamin C. And so are we concerned about that mortality and those side effects like we are with the medications that are big pharma funded and approved? So those are just some common issues that I have with us relying on traditional randomized controlled studies when we're actually doing something healthy that can't be studied because of funding and lack of support from a pharmaceutical company. And so I would love to see what you think. And it's just me having this conversation on a daily basis with my patients. And I could go on forever about this just because of the differences, or I'll see things happen, or I'll see videos that kind of make me ponder why we're pushing for medications and surgeries. There's always a need for that, but it doesn't have to be the only option. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. I would love to start a conversation below. I want to see if you're of the mindset of traditional or non-traditional, if you have any opinions about what I just shared. Again, this is just a short segment of all the different opinions I could have on this topic, but let's just start that conversation below. And again, I will see you in the next video.